The automatic glass doors of St. Mary's Children's Hospital slid open, and the sterile scent of disinfectant rushed out to meet the summer heat. Nurses hurried across polished floors, doctors murmured in clipped voices, and anxious parents sat hunched in the waiting room. In the center of it all, a girl in a wheelchair sat with her chin lifted, her long brown hair cascading neatly down her shoulders. Emily Foster, 7 years old, had never taken a step in her life. The daughter of Dr. Michael Foster, one of the most celebrated surgeons in Chicago, she had grown up in this hospital as both patient and princess. Her legs, pale and thin beneath the folds of her dress, lay motionless as always. To everyone who saw her, she was fragile porcelain, beautiful, untouchable, broken. But that day, someone else saw her differently. From the corner of the lobby, a boy in a ragged hoodie and torn sneakers stood watching. His skin was dark, his face smudged with city dust, and his eyes burned with a strange mixture of hunger and determination. His name was Marcus Reed, a 12-year-old who had been sleeping under bridges and abandoned buildings since his grandmother passed. For weeks, he had been haunting the hospital steps, scrounging for scraps from the cafeteria, memorizing every movement of the doctors inside. And today, he crossed the invisible line between the world that rejected him and the one that worshipped men like Michael Foster. He stepped forward, his voice clear, despite the tremor in it. "Let me try." The words sliced through the hum of the lobby. Heads turned. A security guard straightened in alarm. Nurses exchanged startled glances, and Emily blinked at him confused before a soft laugh slipped from her lips. "You," she said, her voice lilting with disbelief. "You think you can make me walk?" Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "Yes, I can." The lobby erupted. A man in a white coat scoffed loudly. "This is absurd. Get him out of here." Another nurse whispered, "That's the homeless boy. He's been hanging around outside for days." The security guard strode forward, placing a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You need to leave." But Marcus didn't move. His voice rose above the chaos, small but steady. "I've watched her. Her legs aren't dead. They're waiting. And I know how to wake them up." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dr. Michael Foster himself emerged from the corridor, his expression thunderous. The sight of the boy daring to touch his daughter's fate was an insult he could barely stomach. "You think you know more than me," he barked. "I've operated on hearts the size of your fist. I've saved lives you can't imagine. My daughter has a condition no one can fix, and you," he jabbed a finger toward Marcus, "are nothing but a stray looking for scraps." Marcus's stomach growled at the word scraps, but his eyes didn't waver. "I don't want your scraps. I want a chance. Give me your leftovers, and I'll give her something no one else has hope." The silence that followed was sharp, dangerous. Emily stared at him, her smile fading as a flicker of something else crept across her face. Not belief, not yet, but curiosity. Her small hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair. "What if you're wrong?" she asked softly. Marcus swallowed his throat dry and whispered the only answer he had. "Then I'll still have tried. But if I'm right, you'll walk." The crowd buzzed with disbelief, anger, mockery. Yet under the fluorescent lights of the hospital lobby, a spark had been struck. For the first time, Emily Foster imagined herself not as porcelain, but as possibility. And for Marcus Reed, homeless and hungry, the laughter echoing around him was not a wall, but a door. What no one knew was that this single moment, the boy's reckless offer, the girl's uncertain laugh, would unravel secrets buried in the hospital for years, and nothing would ever be the same again. Marcus Reed had never known what it meant to belong. His earliest memories were of his grandmother's hands, dark, strong, always smelling faintly of herbs and camphor. Clara Reed had been a midwife on Chicago's South Side, a woman who carried centuries of whispered remedies in her head. To the neighbors, she was Granny Clara, a healer who never turned away a crying child or a desperate mother. Marcus was 5 when she first pressed his tiny fingers to a patient's wrist. "Listen, boy," she had said. "The body speaks if you're quiet enough." A doctor sees with his eyes, but a healer listens with his soul. For 7 years, Marcus listened. He learned to notice the tremor in a hand, the flicker of an eyelid, the twitch of a muscle. Granny Clara swore he had a gift, but when she passed, her apartment was taken, and Marcus was left with nothing but a backpack of notebooks and a head full of her teachings. The foster homes were crowded, loud, and cruel. Marcus slipped away one night and never went back. Since then, the streets had been his school. He scavenged meals, slept in bus stations, and lingered outside St. Mary's Hospital, not only for food, but because the place hummed with life. Doctors and nurses bustled past him, blind to the boy in the hoodie, but Marcus studied them like an eager student memorizing the patterns of their work. Emily Foster's world was the opposite. A mansion in Lincoln Park, a chauffeur to drive her to appointments, and a father who ruled the hospital halls like a king. Yet privilege had never given her what she longed for, most freedom from the chair. Emily had been born with a diagnosis stamped on her medical record before she took her first breath: congenital neuromuscular disorder. Doctors told her parents she would never walk. Her father, Dr. Michael Foster, refused to accept it at first. He summoned specialists from Boston, London, Zurich. They all said the same thing: impossible. Eventually, Michael turned his refusal into pride. If Emily could not walk, then he would build her a world so grand she would never need to. She had the best tutors, the finest toys, a wardrobe fit for a princess. Yet beneath the satin dresses and ballet recitals staged from her chair, Emily carried a hollow ache. She watched other children chase each other in the park, their legs flying, their voices high with laughter. She smiled politely when guests patted her head and said she was brave. But alone in her room, she pressed her palms against her legs, willing them to move, whispering just once. "Please, just once, please." The 2 children lived only blocks apart, yet their worlds could not have been further. Marcus looked in through hospital windows, studying lives he could never touch. Emily looked out from her father's limousine, staring at children who ran where she could not follow. And fate, cruel and strange, chose to bring them together in the most unlikely of places, the hospital lobby. For weeks, Marcus had lingered there, drawn not only by the leftover trays, but by the sight of Emily. He noticed what others missed: the slight flutter in her calves when she laughed, the way her toes curled faintly when she was startled, movements so subtle even her doctors dismissed them as reflexes. But Marcus remembered Granny Clara's words: "Nothing is random. The body speaks." And so when he stepped forward and said, "Let me try it," wasn't the voice of a reckless street boy. It was the echo of a healer's legacy daring to challenge the marble walls of power and pride. Back in her father's office, Emily had once asked him softly, "Daddy, what if they're wrong about me?" Michael Foster had kissed the top of her head, hiding the shadow in his eyes. "They're not wrong, sweetheart. You're perfect the way you are." But the shadow lingered, because deep inside, even he sometimes wondered, had they been too quick to accept the verdict? Emily, of course, never spoke of that doubt again. Until the day a homeless boy stood in front of her chair, unafraid to voice the question she had buried all her life. What if the impossible wasn't impossible after all? The day after Marcus Reed's bold declaration in the hospital lobby, the story had already traveled through every corridor. From nurses whispering at the front desk to interns chuckling in the cafeteria, everyone knew about the homeless boy who claimed he could make the surgeon's daughter walk. Most laughed. Some scoffed, but a few those who had watched Emily Foster over the years felt a sting of unease. Because deep down, they had noticed the little things too. The twitch, the curl, the flicker. In Dr. Michael Foster's office, the atmosphere was electric with fury. The surgeon paced behind his mahogany desk, his white coat whipping around him like a cape. "This is unacceptable," he thundered. "A stray boy humiliating my daughter in public. If we allow this circus our reputation, my reputation will be destroyed." Beside him sat Dr. Harrison, head of pediatric neurology, his round glasses gleaming as he leaned back in his chair. Harrison had been the one to sign off on Emily's diagnosis years ago. For him, the boy's words weren't just an insult, they were a direct threat. "Relax," Michael Harrison said smoothly. "He's a child. No one takes him seriously." Michael slammed a hand on the desk. The public saw. Patients saw. If that boy plants even the smallest seed of doubt, it will undo everything we've worked for. "Then we'll remove him." Harrison replied, his voice like silk over poison. "Security will ensure he never sets foot in this hospital again." But Marcus didn't leave. That evening, he slipped past the guards and found Emily in the therapy ward. She sat by the window watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though there was no fear in her voice. Marcus shrugged. "Neither should you." Emily blinked. "What do you mean, you shouldn't be stuck in that chair?" he said simply. Her breath caught. No doctor, no nurse, not even her father had ever dared say those words to her. They had wrapped her in silk and pity, convincing her to accept the chair as her fate. And here was a boy in torn sneakers speaking the thought she had whispered to herself for years. "Show me," she said suddenly. "If you're so sure, show me." Marcus knelt beside her chair, his fingers hovering near her ankles. He didn't touch, just observed. "When you laugh, your legs twitch. When you're startled, your toes curl. That means the nerves are alive, not dead." Emily's eyes widened. "You noticed that too?" Marcus nodded. "Your body's waiting. It's not hopeless." For the first time, Emily felt something she hadn't dared to believe impossibility. The next morning, rumors exploded. A nurse had overheard Emily whispering to her tutor, "The boy thinks I can walk." By lunch, the cafeteria buzzed with speculation. Some said the boy was crazy. Others, quieter, admitted they'd seen the same movements, but had been too afraid to speak. Dr. Harrison convened an emergency meeting with senior staff. His voice was icy. "We cannot allow this child to undermine years of medical records. If families believe our diagnoses can be overturned by a street boy, our authority will collapse." Do I make myself clear? Everyone nodded, everyone except Nurse Janet, a veteran who had worked at the hospital since before Harrison's tenure. Her sharp eyes lingered on the neurologist. She had always felt something was off about Emily's case, but Harrison had silenced her every time. Now she wasn't so sure. Security began patrolling the hospital entrances, ejecting Marcus whenever they caught him. Yet, each time he returned, he slipped through delivery docks, climbed fire escapes, and even once hid in a laundry cart just to reach Emily. "You're stubborn," she said, grinning one evening as he crawled out of a closet, hair tousled from hiding. "You're worth it," he replied without hesitation. Emily's cheeks flushed. For the first time in her short life, she felt less like a patient and more like a girl. Meanwhile, Michael Foster grew increasingly desperate. He scolded Emily when she mentioned Marcus. "He's filling your head with false hope. He's nothing but a beggar trying to exploit you." Emily's small hands tightened on the arms of her chair. "He sees me, Daddy. Not just the chair. Me." Michael froze. His daughter's words cut deeper than any scalpel. For years he had been the great surgeon, the protector, the provider. Yet in her eyes, he realized he had failed to give her the one thing she craved most belief. The pressure mounted like a storm. Harrison whispered poison into Michael's ear, insisting the boy had to be silenced. Nurses whispered to each other in the halls, torn between loyalty and doubt. And Emily, caught in the middle, clung to the spark Marcus had lit inside her. One night, as Marcus slipped away under the cover of darkness, he whispered to himself the words Granny Clara had once told him: "A healer listens with his soul." He knew the war had only begun. Because this wasn't just about helping Emily walk. It was about tearing down walls of pride, fear, and lies, walls that men like Dr. Harrison had built high and strong. And Marcus Reed was ready to break them. The storm Marcus had sensed was no longer just on the horizon. It was inside the hospital walls, creeping through hushed conversations and suspicious glances. Late one evening, Nurse Janet found Marcus crouched near the therapy wing, waiting for Emily after her physiotherapy session. Instead of scolding him, she looked around carefully, then whispered, "Follow me." Marcus hesitated, then obeyed. Janet led him through a side corridor into the old records room, where dust coated the shelves and fluorescent lights flickered overhead. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it, her voice low but urgent. "I shouldn't be doing this," she said. "But I've been here long enough to know when something stinks. Emily's case has always bothered me. The files, the scans, none of it made sense. I think Harrison has been hiding something." Marcus's heart thudded. "What kind of something?" Janet pulled a thick folder from a locked cabinet, her hands trembling. Inside were MRI scans, charts, and notes. She flipped to a page stamped from 3 years earlier. "Look here," she said, pointing to the images. "This scan shows nerve activity in Emily's lower spine. Not dead, not severed. Just misfiring. With therapy and the right approach, she could have developed muscle response." But Harrison's notes she jabbed at the margin. He wrote, "Severe paralysis. No recovery expected." He dismissed it. He buried it. Marcus stared at the scan, his eyes wide. He wasn't a doctor, but he didn't need to be. He could see the flickers, the signals glowing faintly on the page like sparks waiting to ignite. "He lied," Marcus whispered. "He told everyone she would never walk." Janet nodded grimly, because admitting otherwise would mean he misdiagnosed her from the start. That would destroy his career. And Michael trusted him blindly. Marcus clenched his fists. He stole her future. For 3 years. The next day, Marcus showed Emily the scans. They sat in the therapy ward, the folder spread across her lap. Her hands shook as she traced the faint lines on the images. "All this time, I thought my body was broken." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Your body's been waiting." Harrison was the broken one. Tears welled in her eyes, but not from sadness, from anger. "Why would he do this?" Pride Marcus spat. "The same reason rich people step over kids like me on the street. Because admitting they're wrong scares them more than ruining someone else's life." Emily's grip tightened on the folder. For 7 years, she had accepted the chair as her cage. Now, for the first time, she saw the bars for what they were: not fate, but fraud. That evening, Dr. Michael Foster returned home, late, weary from surgeries. Emily wheeled into his study, the folder on her lap. "Daddy," she said softly, "look at this." Michael glanced through the scans, frowning. "Where did you—" "Doesn't matter." Emily cut in, her voice trembling but strong. "What matters is that Harrison lied. I could have been trying years ago. You let him decide my life, and you never questioned him." Michael's face hardened. Emily, medicine isn't that simple. It is when it's the truth, she shouted, startling him. Marcus saw it. Janet saw it. And deep down, you've seen it too, haven't you? Michael froze. The conviction in his daughter's voice pierced deeper than any argument. He remembered the nights he watched her toes twitch, the mornings he wondered if the chair had become too convenient an answer. But he had buried those doubts beneath Harrison's authority. Now the truth stared back at him from his own daughter's eyes. The next day, Marcus, Emily, and Janet met secretly in the hospital chapel, its stained glass windows casting fractured light across the pews. "We have proof," Marcus said, tapping the folder. "But Harrison controls the board. If we go to them, he'll bury it again." "Then we don't go to them," Emily replied, her voice steady. "We show everyone." Janet gasped. "Emily, that could ruin your father." "His reputation, my father will have to choose." Emily said, her jaw set, between protecting a lie and protecting me. Marcus looked at her, pride swelling in his chest. The girl who once only whispered doubts was now ready to fight. Outside in his office, Dr. Harrison stared out the window, his reflection warped in the glass. He had heard whispers. He knew the boy had wormed his way deeper than expected. And he knew Emily Foster was no longer a silent patient. He poured himself a drink, his hand unsteady. "If they expose me," he muttered, "I'll take them all down with me." The first cracks had appeared in Harrison's empire of white coats and silence. And Marcus Reed, the boy no one wanted, had become the hammer striking the walls. The truth was out there now, glowing faintly like a spark. All it needed was one public moment to ignite into fire. Saturday morning at St. Mary's Children's Hospital began like any other parent's clutched paperwork. Children clung to stuffed animals, nurses bustled through the wide atrium. But there was a different hum in the air, a restless energy that seemed to vibrate through the marble floor. Word had spread Dr. Michael Foster was hosting a press conference in the main auditorium to announce new funding for pediatric neurology. Every staff member was expected to attend. By mid-morning, the room was packed. Rows of white coats filled the seats, reporters crowded in the back, and cameras glared beneath the fluorescent lights. On stage, Dr. Harrison sat beside Michael Foster, his round glasses gleaming, his smile smooth and confident. Behind them, a banner read, "A future without limits." Marcus Reed stood at the edge of the crowd, his hoodie pulled tight, clutching the folder of scans like a weapon. Beside him, Emily Foster wheeled herself forward, her face pale but determined. Nurse Janet flanked them, her jaw clenched. "Are you ready?" Marcus whispered. Emily's hands tightened on her chair. More than ever, Dr. Michael Foster stepped to the podium. Today he began, his voice steady. "We reaffirm our commitment to treating children with neurological disorders." With the leadership of Dr. Harrison, he stopped. In the front row, Emily wheeled forward, her voice rising above the microphone. "With the leadership of a liar, you mean?" Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras swung to capture the girl in the chair, her eyes blazing. Michael froze. "Emily, what are you?" She lifted the folder high. "For 7 years you all told me I would never walk, but the scans prove otherwise." Harrison knew. He buried the truth. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Dr. Harrison's smile faltered. "Ridiculous," he barked. "Those are outdated images, misread by amateurs." "Then explain this," Marcus shouted, stepping forward. He flipped open the folder, showing the scans to the front rows. Clear neural activity. Not dead, not severed. You saw it and lied. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. "Is this true?" one demanded. "Did you falsify the diagnosis?" Harrison's face reddened. "That boy is nothing but a vagrant. He's not qualified to." But before he could finish, Emily gripped the arms of her chair. With Marcus kneeling beside her, she whispered, "Don't let me fall." Slowly, painfully, she pressed her weight onto trembling legs. Gasps filled the auditorium as her knees buckled, then steadied. Her small hand clung to Marcus's shoulder. And then one step. The sound of her shoe scraping against the floor echoed louder than any applause. Another step. Reporters shouted, nurses cried out, cameras flashed wildly. Emily's face twisted with effort, but her eyes burned with triumph. "I can move," she gasped. The room erupted. Dr. Harrison leapt to his feet, panic in his eyes. "This is staged a trick." But his voice was drowned by the roar of the crowd, reporters demanding answers, parents pointing, doctors whispering furiously. Janet stormed onto the stage, her voice sharp. "You lied to this child for years, Harrison. You buried her future to protect your pride." Michael Foster stood frozen, torn between disbelief and horror. His daughter, his fragile porcelain doll, was walking in front of the world. And the man he had trusted most had betrayed them all. Harrison lunged for the microphone, but Marcus blocked him, his small frame braced like steel. "You had power." Marcus said, his voice clear enough for the cameras. "You used it to silence the truth. But the truth walked into this room today, and it can't be silenced anymore." The crowd thundered with applause, drowning out Harrison's protests. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. Harrison, once untouchable, now looked small under the lights. Reporters shouted his name, demanding explanations. Nurses turned their backs on him. And in the center of it all, Emily Foster stood on trembling legs, holding Marcus's hand for balance. Michael stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Emily. My God." She looked at him, tears shining. "Daddy, he believed in me when no one else did." The surgeon's proud shoulders sagged as shame filled his eyes. Dr. Harrison tried to push through the crowd, but security closed in. Reporters followed him, cameras rolling, as the man who once ruled the neurology department stumbled under the weight of his own lies. On stage, Marcus and Emily faced the flashing lights together, her hand gripping his like an anchor. The auditorium wasn't just witnessing a girl's first steps. They were watching a truth so long buried finally rise to the surface. And in that blaze of cameras and tears, Marcus Reed, the homeless boy no one wanted, had brought a titan of medicine to his knees. The auditorium at St. Mary's had become a courtroom without walls. Cameras still flashed as Emily clung to Marcus, her legs trembling but steady. The miracle of her first steps filled the air like lightning, but the storm wasn't over. Because now the crowd wanted blood. Reporters swarmed forward, microphones thrust out like weapons. "Harrison, did you falsify these records? Were you aware of nerve activity in Emily Foster's scans? Did you deliberately misdiagnose to protect your career?" Dr. Harrison raised both hands, his face dripping sweat under the lights. "Lies, all of it. This is the delusion of a child and a street rat. You can't believe them over me, but the evidence was already unraveling his defense." Nurse Janet stepped up, her voice cutting through the chaos. 3 years ago, I filed a report questioning Emily's diagnosis. Harrison dismissed me, threatened my job if I brought it up again. I still have the copy. Gasps rippled through the audience. Janet's voice didn't waver. He silenced me. He silenced others. And now, you all see why. Dr. Pierce, another neurologist, stood hesitantly from the crowd. It's true, I saw the scans too. The signs were there. But Harrison insisted we classify the case as irreversible. He looked down, shame burning his cheeks. We obeyed, because we were afraid of him. All eyes turned back to Harrison, who stood cornered on the stage. "You fools," he spat, his mask cracking. "Do you think I'd throw away my reputation for nothing? Do you know what it would mean to admit I was wrong? The lawsuits, the disgrace." His voice rose wild and desperate. "I built this department. I funded half of your salaries. I, Michael Foster," stepped forward, his face pale as marble. "And you stole my daughter's future." Harrison froze. The man who had once defended him now stood against him. Michael's voice shook, but it carried across the room. "I trusted you. I let your word define her life. And you lied to protect yourself." Emily's voice chimed in, soft but cutting. "You told me I would never walk. You locked me in this chair so you could stay powerful. But you were wrong. And the whole world saw it." A security officer entered quietly from the back, murmuring into a radio. The board of directors had already been informed. Harrison's career wasn't just in danger, it was finished. One reporter shouted, "Dr. Harrison, did you receive payments from pharmaceutical reps for endorsing unnecessary treatments?" The room stirred. Harrison's face blanched. Another reporter waved a document. "Anonymous sources claim you took bribes to keep certain cases classified as incurable. Did you profit from children's suffering?" The man's silence was damning. His mouth opened, closed, but no words came. Nurse Janet stepped forward again, holding up a second folder. "I have copies of financial records. Payments routed through shell accounts. It's all here." The crowd exploded. Doctors who had once bowed to Harrison now turned away, shaking their heads in disgust. Reporters surged closer, capturing his downfall from every angle. Harrison's composure finally shattered. His glasses slipped down his nose as he screamed at the crowd. "You don't understand. This system eats people alive. I only did what I had to do to survive." But the excuse rang hollow. In the front row, a mother clutched her disabled child tighter, her face streaked with tears. "You robbed her of hope," she whispered. "You robbed them all." The auditorium erupted in fury. Shouts of shame and fraud rang out, echoing off the high ceilings. Security moved in. Harrison tried to push past them, but they seized his arms, pulling him toward the exit as cameras followed every stumble. His empire of fear and silence was collapsing in real-time broadcast for the city to see. On stage, Emily straightened, still leaning on Marcus, but standing taller than she ever had before. She looked out at the sea of faces, doctors, nurses, parents, reporters, and spoke with a strength far beyond her 7 years. "You told me my life was over." She said, her eyes fixed on Harrison's retreating figure. "But today proves you don't decide who we are. The truth does." Applause thundered through the auditorium, drowning out the last of Harrison's protests as he was dragged away. For Marcus, standing beside her, it wasn't just victory. It was vindication for his grandmother's teachings, for every night he had gone hungry, for every time the world told him he was nothing. And for Emily, it was rebirth. The girl who had never walked was now more than a patient. She was proof that lies could be broken, that chains could be lifted, that truth, once seen, could never be hidden again. The fraud had been exposed. The tyrant had fallen. And now all that remained was the healing. 2 weeks after the storm that shook St. Mary's Hospital, the auditorium no longer echoed with shouts of scandal. Instead, it echoed with laughter, children's laughter. The banner that once bore Dr. Harrison's name had been taken down. In its place hung a new one, the Lily Reed Pediatric Rehabilitation Center, named after Marcus's grandmother, the healer, whose legacy had outlived the walls of pride and corruption. Emily Foster was at the center of it all. She stood on trembling but determined legs, gripping the parallel bars of the therapy ward. Nurses cheered softly as she took one step then another, each movement shaky but real. Her father, Michael, stood nearby, tears streaming down his face. For years he had accepted Harrison's word as gospel. Now he saw his daughter proving that truth was stronger than any title. "Daddy, look," Emily whispered as she managed 3 full steps. "I'm doing it." Michael fell to his knees, taking her small hands in his. "You're not just doing it," he said through tears. "You're flying." In the corner, Marcus Reed watched quietly, his hoodie still ragged, his shoes still worn thin. Yet for the first time, no one saw him as a stray. Doctors nodded respectfully. Parents clasped his shoulder in thanks. Even the hospital board, ashamed of their silence, had approved a scholarship fund in his name. Nurse Janet approached him, slipping something into his hand, a key. "This is for you," she said softly. "It's to the study room in the new center. A place for your books, your grandmother's notes. You belong here, Marcus." His throat tightened. Belonging was something he had never dared to imagine. That night, Emily and Marcus sat together by the wide hospital window. The city stretched before them, glowing with lights like a sea of stars. "Do you think I'll ever run?" Emily asked quietly. Marcus smiled. "One step at a time. But yeah, I think you will." She turned to him, her eyes bright. "And what about you? What do you want?" He looked down at his grandmother's worn notebook, the pages filled with sketches and remedies. "I want to keep listening. To bodies, to people. The way Granny Clara taught me. Maybe one day I'll wear one of those white coats. But I won't forget the streets. Or you." Emily reached for his hand. "Then we'll walk forward together." On the evening of the center's official opening, the entire community gathered. Parents lit candles one by one, filling the hospital steps with a warm golden glow. Each flame represented a child who had been silenced, a truth that had been buried, now brought into the light. Emily stood at the top of the steps, Marcus at her side. She held her candle high, her legs trembling, but unbroken. "This flame," she said to the crowd, her voice steady, "is for every child who was told they couldn't. Tonight we prove they can." Cheers rose, mingling with the glow of hundreds of tiny flames. Marcus looked at the candle in his own hands. Its small fire flickered against the wind, fragile yet unyielding. He thought of Granny Clara, of nights spent hungry and afraid, of the moment he dared to step into that hospital lobby. A boy who had asked for scraps had lit a fire that could never be put out. And beside him, the surgeon's daughter, who had never walked, was learning not only to stand, but to lead.